Welcome back, everyone, to SuiteScript Stories, hosted by Salto. My name is Eric Rubaugh, and I am joined by my ever ambitious co host, Tim Dietrich. And we are here today to talk about transitioning SuiteScript or NetSuite projects with Cassius Kellogg of Bryant Park Consulting. Cassius, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Eric. Nice to be with
Yeah.
you again, Tim.
Yeah.
Give us just a quick introduction to yourself, your role, and what you're doing at Bryant Park Consulting these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Cassius Kellogg, based in Denver, Colorado. Spent my entire career in the NetSuite ecosystem. So as I was just mentioning, went to college down in Arizona, came out with an accounting degree, and was just trying to find where a home might be for a career. And thankfully was able to end up at NetSuite, actually direct, in part of their first ever professional services college hiring group. So I was one of 7 students nationwide to be selected to participate in that. And it was a phenomenal opportunity. Was able to actually get 6 months of handholding back in the day. I know that the analyst program still continues today at NetSuite internally. A little bit of a different environment, but for that first one, they definitely gave us a long leash. And that was a phenomenal learning opportunity to learn consulting, but also get pretty deep within the product. So I was able to spend my first 3.5 years at NetSuite and actually left NetSuite just prior to the Oracle acquisition and decided to go a partner route to continue to grow my skills and career with a little bit more flexibility in terms of actually learning some techno-functional skills. So coming out of school, did not have a technical bone in my body and was able to learn quite a bit of SuiteScript 1.0 at the time. Actually, good shout out to you, Eric, for a lot of the content that you put out. Stoic software and a lot of the YouTube videos was a good foundational learning opportunity for me to get more exposure and was able to build up different products. I've always looked at myself as a problem solver, maybe more so than anything else. And I think that still continues for where I'm at today. So I ended up joining up with my current co-founder, Alec Epstein at Bryant Park Consulting. He came over from another Alliance NetSuite partner, and we began Bryant Park Consulting in 2021. So founded in April of 2021. First billable hour was June 1st of 2021. Memorable day, as I was that first billable hour. And then we haven't really looked back since. So we've been able to grow pretty significantly. I currently have the title of VP of Services, so I oversee the entire delivery team, both technical and functional, within the organization. We're just under 100 total people, but we have about 80 people of the 100 in the delivery services. So that is been great to see the growth. It's been phenomenal to welcome a lot of different backgrounds and talents, and we are verticalized and pursuing a lot of really great initiatives. So that's a little bit about where I am today, and I've been able to shift a lot of the problem solving from NetSuite solutioning and problem solving to more entrepreneurial business owner and strategy problem solving. And with that fast growth, definitely comes a lot of problem solving and arranging and strategy. But it's been very fun to be able to get a lot of exposure to a plethora of different customers across different industries. But one of the common themes and the reason why I stay in the NetSuite ecosystem and probably will, hopefully, for as long as I can, is the flexibility of the platform and the opportunity that we have to solution for the wide array of different clientele across different industries. And NetSuite isn't necessarily built for one industry or another. And that gives developers especially the opportunity to have a lot of fun, and that problem solving really kicks into gear. So been able to see a lot of things from a lot of different angles, and I think that's really maybe one of the reasons why I was invited to be a panelist here today, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
It's a great
Great.
intro. Yeah, so um I was talking with Eric before we all got together and told him that, I've known you for a while. You and I first met in February of 2018. I know that because I went back through my journal and found, like, I actually have the exact date that you and I met. um, so you were a consultant on the project, first NetSuite project that I had worked on as a client that was transitioning to NetSuite. And I just remember being impressed by you right from the start. Like, you knew your stuff, so to speak. And I would say that there are three influential people that helped me get started in NetSuite. And I thought only two of them were going to be on the call, but I see Sam Hornstein is in the audience. And so shout out to Sam. So those three people are Eric, from a coding standpoint, like you mentioned, his YouTube videos were and still are like just awesome. Sam just, introducing me to the whole concept of NetSuite and really just explaining to me like why it was awesome. And then getting to work with you on that first project and just seeing it from the perspective of like a consultant who is coming in and really helping to solve a business, or help a business solve a problem and get on the platform. It was just an awesome first experience. And so I thank you for that and for joining us today. I think your background and your sort of NetSuite path, if you will, are perfect for what we're going to talk about today. So I'm really glad that you're here.
Likewise.
So I want to talk a little bit more about your background. I guess more so just with like what appears to be this explosive growth of Bryant Park Consulting. I mean, you mentioned that you guys really started making a go at it in, was it 2021, like early 2021, did you say?
I would call it more mid 2021,
Okay.
but yeah.
And was it just you and
And
Alec, like just the two of you at the start, or did you you have 100 employees now? Like that's wild. Like
yeah.
how did you plant the seed, so to speak? Like, how did that work?
So Alec and I have a pretty cool introduction to one another. And although it's maybe a little less technical, might be still fun to express the context of how Bryant Park came to be. And when I was at NetSuite, was always trying to push the limits and do more and learn more and be able to deliver more for customers. And a fellow coworker of mine was someone I was able to share a lot of ideas, opinions of, and kind of let it known that I think I'm maybe hitting a ceiling with where I'm at. I want to do a little bit more. I'm going to go explore some other options. And 2 years later, maybe not quite 2 years, about a year and a half later, that same individual that I was saying those things to, Alec Epstein, said the same things to that exact individual while they were on site. And she said, I think it might be good for you to talk with this guy, Cassius. You guys seem to have a pretty similar mindset, drive, and are very talented. So was able to get introduced to Alec, talked through a lot of the decision making that I made in terms of leaving. So at that time, I had actually left NetSuite while he was still there. Alec also went through the analyst program, so very similar routes. And then was able to introduce him over to one of my former analyst colleagues, Stephen Wolf, over at Myers Holm. And then Alec was able to build a great organization at MHI alongside Stephen and many others. So when Alec decided maybe his time was up over at MHI, he wanted to really pioneer something and felt we could probably do this maybe on our own, and was able to call me up and said, I got a good amount of sales contacts. I've been able to form really genuine relationships with the NetSuite account executives as an alliance partner. My partnership was actually a slightly different partnership where I was at, was a solution provider partner. And so we were able to sell our own licenses, a little bit of a different selling motion, but a lot of focus on the delivery side. So that delivery and sales camaraderie, especially when we came from the same roots, we had very tight alignment from day one. And we both as I said before, we're very eager, optimistic, talented individuals, and sort of knew the path since we had already seen what growth of an organization had looked like, and took the leap of faith to say, let's go do it. And we had a lot of strategies that maybe I could get into, maybe I don't need to get into today. I'll let you all kind of control the narrative, but it was some different domino pieces, making sure that we hire the right people. In this community, it's all about the people. I mean, that's the industry, and the product that we sell is ourselves. We sell our talent, we sell services. So our connections that we were able to form throughout our tenure in the ecosystem, and the value that we contribute when we are working on a project. For example, the relationship that you and I were able to form on that first project, Tim, is a lifelong relationship. And if you go into any business interaction with a mindset that you are going to cross paths, maybe not once, maybe not twice, it could be 100 more times, or maybe similar to how Alec and I kind of were first introduced. I was able to give a referral to another organization. He remembered those conversations, very genuine, and thought of me to be a resource to build around. So here we are today with another longer lapse between that project, some of the other projects that we worked on between then and now, but the introduction is a representation of a genuine relationship that I think is really the DNA of what we do at Bryant Park Consulting. And that is making sure that inside the organization, we're really well connected, that we're working on behalf of one another, and hopefully we can take that same genuine approach to our clientele, establish those relationships either with them, with partners that we're working alongside, et cetera. And with good service, with good people, demand somewhat comes naturally. I think I have to give a lot more credit to Alec and his ability to be an absolute machine on the sales side. That guy is an absolute genius, but it's a lot of fun working alongside of him, but carrying that kind of value prop into everything that we do, I think has been a product of our success.
Yeah, I mean, with 100 people already, you're doing something right. So it's very impressive. That being said, like, what challenges are you facing? You know, is there anything that's like, are you at a point in your growth where things are starting to get a little more tricky, or is everything good?
So I was introduced to a book actually by the business owner, one of the business owners of our first project together, Tim, a guy by the name of Jay. I'll save his last name, but Jay introduced me to a book called Predictable Success actually about 2 weeks ago. And with growth comes challenges. Growth is something that you think, it just happens. Either you just keep selling and keep doing the same thing in a repetitive motion. It's definitely not the case. So when you're in a startup mode, you can act on a dime. And when you have really powerful executives that can still get hands-on in the product, have implemented over 100 different implementations themselves, they can come to the rescue. But as you establish business layers of managerial kind of layers, that decision making slows down just naturally. So within our growth, I have personally felt numerous what I'll call stress points. So going from 5 to 25, that layer of management kicked in for me around 10, but definitely at 25, where there is no way I could manage 24 other individuals or 23 other individuals. So what we've set in place from a managerial structure from really day one, and this is something I had learned in the past, was not to have any more than 10 direct reports. Ideally, we have between 5 and 10 as a comfortable balance. You have certain individuals that are the rock stars that, hey, you know what, that person's going to go, they're going to do their thing. I don't need to worry about them too much. Sometimes I might have to actually empower them or challenge them to get the most efficiency or most productivity out of them. Others are going to need a little bit more hand holding. But overall org structure, we really have reorged every 6 months consistently. We've never missed it. We've actually never missed a performance review either. Many organizations may claim to do a review period. I don't know how many in the audience or who will watch this will say, I have received one heck of a performance review from my manager. I got a lot of transparent feedback for constructive criticism, for goals and alignment on what we want to do for the next XYZ period. For us, it's 6 months, and probably will continue that way for foreseeable future. But as we grew, establishing trust is paramount with the people that we put in those managerial chairs. And then what we do from that point forward also needs to be somewhat replicated. But what I got out of this book, and something that is definitely relevant for Bryant Park Consulting, is one of our goals as a company is to be a one-stop shop. It is very difficult when, especially in a more enterprise level NetSuite implementation, you're going to see partners, you're going to see different modules. You may have core NetSuite, you may have something like NSPB or NetSuite Planning and Budgeting from an EPM standpoint. You may have NetSuite Data Analytics Warehouse, NSAW. You may have integrations more often than not, especially in a lot of the verticals that we're focused on, which is primarily products, but we also have some high-tech services, et cetera. So when we have a Celigo, a Boomi, other iPaaS, you want to have an integration practice. You then have to have dev practice, as we absolutely know is a necessity. So being able to deliver upon all of those services is something that we really wanted to do from day one. And we had strategies in order to put that in place. But from that book, it says what actually is the pain is not growth itself. It is the complexity that comes with the growth. So if I decided we're just going to be a WD consulting shop, we're not going to do everything that I just mentioned, we're going to be a one-trick pony, I could probably grow the organization from 1 to 1,000 and have less pain than what we have done from 1 to 100. Just because there is a different dynamic, there's a different selling motion, there's a different delivery motion. We've also introduced managed services, and that is really our post-go live support, continued optimization. That is a whole different selling dynamic from a net new implementation where we don't have much to worry about. We got a clean slate. And I think that's also maybe part of our discussion, very relevant to, hey, I was here at the very beginning, I implemented, I had no obstacles in my way. I didn't have to consider really anything because I'm writing it from scratch per se. But in a post-go live environment, in an optimization environment, you're going to see some of that natural turnover, whether it be our resources, which we've thankfully, knock on wood, had very little turnover, which I'm thankful for. I think part of that relationship is a reason why, and setting a good work environment with opportunities to open doors, which is another reason why we've decided to grow. We want to see that organic growth, put people that we're really proud of, that have career ambitions to move up with the different dynamics of managerial responsibilities, plus more technical responsibilities, maybe become a product owner, an industry niche leader, whatever it might be. But that complexity piece is really where you get the pain. And one thing that I think we've done really well is always planned ahead. We've put strategy in place to hire top of the line resources. So that started with Alec. Maybe I'll say I was the top of the line resource to build the services team, but we have identified, in our opinion, some of the top devs, the top data analytics individuals, top managed services individuals who have done this in the past. We use that experience, we build around it, and that has been able to really provide a good foundation for our continued growth. And again, it's not been easy. I'll say that. There's definitely challenges that we face. Is quality perfect? No. Can we get better at it? Yes. Will we get better at it? Heck yes, we will. And we continue to refine our processes. We come up with new solutions to plug some of the challenges that we are at this point anticipating, which has been great. But it is not just Alec or myself. There are mentors that we lean on heavily, such as Jay that I just mentioned. I try and keep in touch with a lot of business owners, business executives, entrepreneurs, technical wizards, etc. And it's not what just lives in the two of our heads or even the heads of the rest of the team. It's a continuation of learning, empowerment, and wisdom that we are constantly seeking day in and day out.
That's awesome. Eric, do you have
Clear,
any?
we need to bring you back for an episode on like the business,
Yeah.
business, organizational leadership, that sort of thing. But yeah, I want to bring us in. You just mentioned, stuff in the head, stuff just in people's heads. And you mentioned, delivering and transitioning, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I do want to talk about that, especially that, not many of us get the greenfield, like pure implementation. Like those are much more rare than the ongoing inherited project. So how do we not keep everything isolated in someone's head? How do we go about let's start with the first case of onboarding ourselves to a new project. What are the strategies and techniques that you use in your, say, your managed services? When you come into a new client, what are you having your team do to get up to speed quickly and deliver quality in that scenario versus the lovely blank slate green field?
Yeah. First thing that we train our individuals, and I did this myself back in the day, was we look at enable features. So you have to know what modules and features are turned on in the environment because those checkboxes are extremely powerful. Anyone that has configured an environment knows the ins and outs of enable features, of accounting preferences, of a slew of the other preferences throughout the system, general preferences, inventory management preferences, etc. One check or uncheck of those checkboxes dramatically changes the way the environment performs. And even this morning, I was actually working with one of our developers, and he was writing an automation to create a fulfillment. And he asked the line items of that fulfillment traditionally have the checkbox to be fulfilled checked by default. However, for whatever reason, as I'm trying to save this fulfillment in this environment, it's saying I'm not selecting any line items. And the accounting preferences specifically has a checkbox that lists whether you want to default your quantities to 0 on fulfillments and or item receipts. So the way that a script had to be written was directly influenced by one little checkbox in accounting preferences. And one message that I'll send maybe to the entire community is you can't be the best. If you're wanting to be the best NetSuite consultant or the best developer, you can't just be an ultra coder. You actually have to have the functional knowledge, the functional awareness of how the environment is going to be running. You got to play by NetSuite's rules, is what I like to say, because of some of the constraints and the power that you cannot overcome unless you just script the hell out of it, which we try to avoid at all costs. If you can use more native functionality, the better. Let NetSuite be your friend, not your enemy. Try to never work against NetSuite native functionality if at all possible. So that's the first step that I go through is we review the enable features. We then go through the preferences, make sure we have a general understanding of how the environment's going to be performing. Next step is actually going to see what is custom. And the first place that I go to look is the count of total suite scripts inside of the environment. I specifically look to see what is not bundled. So there is a filter on the scripts page where you can select from bundle is none. And that's going to tell you what legitimately was customized for that environment specifically that is not part of maybe a bundle that could be managed, could be a suite app, could be any other kind of packaged solution. So that's going to give you a pretty good visualization of, do we have many? Do we have a variety? So you usually would look at that script page without filtering down by the type of SuiteScript, just getting kind of a lay of the land. And then I do the same thing on the workflows. So even though scripts for most developers are the go-to, there can be a lot of automation inside of a NetSuite environment via workflow. Once you have that understanding just from account perspective, you should be able to hopefully read based on the title of those scripts or the records that those workflows are deployed against. You should be able to narrow down where majority of the automation resides. If you see that a single record type, which I would recommend going to NetSuite's scripted records page. So if you're in an admin role, customization, scripting, scripted records, and visualizing if any record looks more bloated than another. Most common records I would say is for sure sales orders. Sales order latency is maybe one of the biggest problems, biggest areas for us to evaluate fixing or optimizing in a managed services capacity. And that puts a lot of frowns into smiles if you can actually get that save time moving a little bit more promptly, especially if you have a large sales organization. So evaluating that scripted records page is going to be vital. Something I was actually talking with Tim about when we were preparing for the content today was that scripted records page is not just to show you what is existing, but it also sets the prioritization or sequence in which the scripts run and execute. And maybe we'll get into a little bit more detail on exactly what should be considered depending on whether you want to tweak an existing script or hopefully less often than more go and rewrite something from scratch and produce a brand new script file, a brand new script record, and potentially inactivate one that you felt, I don't know if I want to be the one touching that thing. Might have a little bit more risk, and then there's plenty of reasons that we can get into of why you might not want to touch someone else's code. So that, I would say, is the way that I spend my first 15 minutes looking at a new environment, just to get a general understanding of how core NetSuite is this or how custom is this. And we've seen some really clean environments, even ones that were sold and implemented pre-2010. So going further back than my NetSuite career of 2013. And then we've seen brand new accounts that don't really look like NetSuite. I would say that NetSuite's running on the custom code as opposed to the code running on NetSuite. And those are very challenging in their own right.
That's a good way to describe it. And, I'm sure a lot of us have seen that. It's, you don't know where to begin almost. So like, I think your tips so far have been like dead on. I think in the last episode, we actually talked a little bit about how it seems like sales orders is the target for customizations. Like, people just can't leave that alone. And wow, so I'm glad you brought that up too. Just to kind of back up a little bit too, I think I wanted to say that one of the reasons why I think what we're talking about is so important is that having this smooth transition between developers, it not only helps the new developer to kind of ease into that role, but, and I think, Cassius, I think you'll agree with this too. If it's done right, it also sort of, it helps your customer as well, right? Because they always get nervous when, whether it's a new company coming in or a new developer working on their system, there's some fear there, some nervousness. And I think that if you can make that appear to be pretty smooth, whether it is or not, that continuity just helps them to feel better about the change that's going on. Not necessarily the technical change, but just the change in the staff, who's actually doing the work. Do you run into that too? I mean, do you have clients who maybe they're your clients where the developer that you guys had is just not available anymore, or they're on another project? And like, how do you deal with that conversation with whether it's a new client or one of your own clients where this transition's about to happen?
Yeah, I'd say when I'll start with kind of a new client, one of our own that maybe we are the first ones writing some code rather than inheriting the code, and our mindset going into how we write that code, but also how do we sell Bryant Park Consulting or the services that we're going to be providing in the methodology and the approach. I will say we never sell an individual. We do not sell Cassius Kellogg. We do not sell Alec Epstein. We sell Bryant Park Consulting is your firm. And this is going to be a firm full of talented individuals that have been taught to work in a team environment. So what does that mean? It means that hopefully we never have a dependency on a single individual. And the only way to avoid that is to approach a full functional and technical team design inclusive of the customer who must be engaged in what the solution and the requirements actually represent. So every single one of our scripts that we write or solutions that we build is preceded by something that we call a solution design document. And Kunal Ruparelia, who heads our technical practice, has been phenomenal. I love that he has taken the instructions that we've given him to say back to our functional team, my developers are not going to write one line of code until you have a solution design document written, reviewed, and more often than not signed off by a customer. That does traditionally add more time to the process at the beginning stages. And I know I have learned from example because, as I said before, I wanted to get more technical. I wanted to learn how to write the code, ended up becoming very savvy with SuiteScript and writing my own solutions. And I wanted to be able to just deliver everything as fast as possible. Oh, yeah, you know what? I can just do it live on the fly. I'll do it right in front of you. Here's the code. Here's the automation. It's built. And customers love that. I got phenomenal feedback because they got to see what they were asking for more or less live, written in front of them in a day or two. But what did that do long term? And I saw this impact when I left NetSuite, when I had written my first few handfuls of automations and custom code, that now that I'm no longer at NetSuite, they actually felt that they were tethered to Cassius. They were not tethered to NetSuite. And as I've grown through my career development into business owner per se, head of an organization, that is not the ideal working relationship that you want with your clients or your employees because of the risk that it could be someone that has a really good opportunity that they want to pursue. And I want to hopefully support them if that means that they're going to go on from Bryant Park. They may start their own business, which is actually a goal of ours as well. Our goal is if someone leaves Bryant Park Consulting, they're going to start their own business. And we've had 2 people leave Bryant Park Consulting to go start their own business, which is actually phenomenal. So how do we approach kind of the entire process? We have to actually get things written down. It kind of comes back to that technical functional combination and skill set that I want my developers actually being able to read that document and contribute their opinions and their angles. Did you all think about this? Oh, no, the functional resource didn't think about how the execution was going to actually take place. Is it on before submit, after submit? Those could actually change the outcome of the solution. Did you think about any dependencies when it comes to whether this is a non-inventory versus an inventory item? So as we grow, and this is kind of back to maybe the success of our growth, we cannot have people in siloed departments. The more technical our functional resources are, the better the technical resources are going to be in delivering the final code, and vice versa. So that's the first step in the approach, is we're going to sell the team in that regard. The next step in the approach is making sure that we are actually writing the code that is representative of what we just did in the solution design document. And what I mean by that is putting plain English commented out within the code, hopefully somewhat frequently. And that's something that Eric also is a big advocate of making sure that we understand, hey, what's the next chunk really doing? I may not be able to read that JavaScript as well as I would like, but I at least can read the one sentence that says, I am now about to kick off a lookup function to a custom pricing table. If we're talking about sales order pricing and seeing some wild things on sales orders, to your point earlier, Tim. So if we just know, okay, this is at least the section that's doing something, now I can point someone to the direction of where maybe the issues were or where I want enhancements. And it is far easier to read lengthy code if you're breaking it down into sections with those comments than not. When I was still writing code at Bryant Park here in the early days, I haven't actually deployed a script to one of our clients probably in over a year. I kind of miss it, but it's probably better that I don't at this point. When I still had some of my early code and we brought in some of our developers to build out that team, I said, yeah, here's one that I wrote. Check it out. Let me know if you have any questions on how it's functioning when we were doing our knowledge transfer. So I could actually hand it off to him. We had the same type of conversation with the customer. Hey, I'm transitioning this new resource in. We're going to have a quick KT. They're going to go through, read it. I surprisingly got feedback that my code was beautiful, which I don't know if it really is. I just like to keep it organized so that I can read it as a functional resource. But it comes back to that commenting. And I think that's extremely powerful, not only for developers. There's some functional resources that just like to understand how the code is expected to be functioning. They may not want to change a single actual piece of JavaScript, but they at least want to know, what is this thing trying to do? What is the objective? And then the same goes for the customer. The customer hopefully has an internal administrator. I would always advocate for someone to have a full-time administrator. Sometimes there's some admin as a service offerings from a lot of partners out there. We somewhat do that in our managed services, depending on the situation. But if you have an internal administrator, maybe they're technical, maybe they're functional as well, that can still benefit from understanding how to provide another technical resource, some guidance. Hey, I know this is the script that's doing something. I know about on line 88, it is doing this. And I think that's where our issue is. And just that small extra direction, I think maybe the two of you could speak to whether that's happened for you, or if it hasn't, maybe the value if it had. I think it's very powerful to just bring that contextual awareness to the table.
Eric, you want to comment on that first?
I want to bring it back a little bit, actually, to, I think there's something really important that we're talking about here, is that basically you mentioned siloed departments. That's basically where this whole problem of transitioning, handing off or onboarding to projects comes from, is when there are walls, artificial or real, like that developer works at a different company. We don't have access to them. Those walls are the problems in this transitioning problem. So you mentioned, like, the more technical your functional resources are and the more functional your technical resources are, that's going to help. And it's also going to help the more that all of those resources are directly involved with the client or the project or the users, whatever context we're in here. And the more we can break down those walls, those silos, and get everyone integrated on the same page, the less problem we're going to have being tied to Cassius, not being tied to Bryant Park Consulting, for instance. And I think that connects nicely also to something you said way at the top, which is, oh no, I'm losing my train of thought. It's escaping. I'm watching it go. I'm going to come back to that. But I think that's the most important thing, is getting these teams, your clients, your users, integrated together, talking. It's when you isolate and you have one developer is responsible for one client and no one else ever talks to that client or sees that account. That is where these problems happen. That is where these black holes occur. And that's where it gets really, really challenging to hand projects off. Oh, I remember what it was. You mentioned, like, acting like you're going to see these people again. Right. I think that's good advice just for life in general. Like everyone you meet, treat them like you're going to see them again. It's good advice for writing code. Treat your code like you're going to see it again in 6 months or
Yeah.
2 years. Uh, and NetSuite is especially true in NetSuite. NetSuite's a super tiny community. You're going to see these people, these projects, these problems again. And so uh, treat them all accordingly. Uh, and that also helps to sort of build and insulate that knowledge. Not insulate, not isolate, like keep it fresh and stored and safe.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know
getting
if
back,
that actually answered.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, I think it did. But getting back to just the comment about comments, we have been talking about doing an episode on commenting code for the longest time. We'll eventually do that. But I want to say, I think that like I don't often come upon scripts that are well documented, and that does make this whole thing we're talking about a lot more difficult. There's sometimes no
yeah,
documentation at all, not just inline documentation, but the design documents, nothing. So the approach that I think that you're taking at Bryant Park is pretty awesome, because it sounds like you've got a fighting chance if you're that developer coming in. As far as the comments go, though, the other part of that I would say is I write my comments as much for myself as I do, hopefully, some other developer that might stumble upon my code at some point in the future. Um, because your future self, you don't know when you're going to see that code again. And you might look at it and be like, what was I thinking here? But with the comments, maybe it helps you to be like, oh, that's right. This is that weird thing like you described earlier, where the defaults, on the line items for an item fulfillment are unchecked and zero. Like maybe that's in the comment, like, here's why I'm doing this crazy thing here. um so I think that helps a lot. But then more recently, I've also had the experience where somebody who is, I wouldn't say non-technical, but more of an admin than a developer, um I encouraged them to look at a script that I had written, and I said, why don't you just try it yourself, because they had expressed interest in learning how to script, so to speak. And sure enough, they were able to go in, look at the code, make sense of it. And it wasn't anything drastic that they changed, but it was, significant in terms of like what the script was going to display. And, that I think it was a boost in their confidence there, right? And if that helps them kind of eventually move towards scripting, then great. What better way to learn the code than look at somebody else's code, right? So, yeah, we're not like in this episode's not about commenting code, but I think it is important in the context of what we're talking about here. So,
yeah.
Oh,
Commenting. I will comment on commenting real quick. It's one very important aspect of documentation. And generally, I write two types of comments. I write structural comments, which is basically JS doc. This function takes these parameters, returns this type of value, so that IDEs can do auto completion and populate the documentation. And you know that when you're calling my function, you're using the right parameters and the right types and stuff. So I write structural API type documentation. And then I write the why comments. Here's this maybe a slightly arcane block of code, or hopefully not too arcane or obscure, but here's why it's here. Not necessarily what it's doing. I tend to assume if you're in there reading the code, you can probably parse out what the code is doing, but you might not know why it's there. In the case of our sales order line item, fulfillment defaults, if I'm, checking that feature, for instance, and I'm, branching the logic based on whether that's set or not, I'm going to put a comment as to why. Like, why did we do that? You can read the if statement, it's doing one thing in this situation and that thing in the other, but you might not know why it's there. And I think that's the level we often miss. You can get the what and the how usually from parsing the code, but not the why. And that's very often missed in the code. So why is this here? Why is it right here? Why is it this way? why is it not that way? And what are the other options we tried, we didn't, that failed? And I think the best place for that is in the code. The best place for documenting why the code is a certain way is in the code. The more you start to separate the documentation from the code, the more silos, the more walls you're building.
100%.
That's a good segue into another, I think, thing that we can do to make the transitioning easier, and that is, if at all possible, provide access to the previous developer. Because I think that, like what you just described, that why, like the context of what the code is doing or why it was written that way, does get lost sometimes. It's like sometimes people don't document it, or it's difficult to put that into words, like, here's why I did this crazy thing in my code. So being able to actually talk to the developer is, that's invaluable. Like, and again, I think a lot of these things are difficult to capture in comments. Having said that, I know there are circumstances where having access to the previous developer might be difficult or impossible. Maybe they've left the company. Maybe they're like, I'm not doing this NetSuite thing anymore. Whatever. I'm going to go do Chat GPT or whatever. So yeah, I think that's important. And then I think, if you don't have access to the previous developer, I think the second best is actually, was there a project manager that was on that project that's still around too? Because they might also have a perspective that even the developer doesn't have, like frustrations that the customer had even after the code went live, and just, or the challenges that the developer ran into and they just conveniently forgot, like, yeah, I really just made this work and it's ugly, but it works. Maybe the project manager can give you perspective on that, and that you're never going to get from the developer. So I think we're slowly putting together a good list of like things to do here, that'll help with these transitions. Cassius, I'm curious about, like, you mentioned this design document, and one of the things I had on my list was not only good documentation, but establishing standards. And in a conversation that Eric and I had earlier today, we talked a little bit about that too, about the importance of standards in coding and stuff like that. So I'm curious about like how far that goes in Bryant Park. I mean, is everything like very formal with that part of the coding? Like,
Yeah, we definitely have a fairly robust quality control process. We do use GitHub internally, so we have code reviews, code approvals that go through some of the native features that you get from GitHub. And that has been very powerful for multiple eyes to go on to the code. And not just within our dev practice, but actually throughout the entire organization of Bryant Park, we are extremely heavy on enablement. So I don't know exactly what number employee he was, but our enablement manager was hired definitely sub 15 employees, which is usually unheard of. You're running lean, especially if you're self-funded and you got to keep cash flow high. Well, I want all my resources billable. Our enablement manager has never been billable day in his career. He actually came from an education background, didn't even have NetSuite expertise per se, but he knows how to teach, he knows how to build curriculums, and every single employee that joins Bryant Park goes through a very thorough, intricate onboarding process, multi-week process, and we now have that team and verticalized. So we're putting people into a day one set of expectations that this is the level of code. These are the standards that you have to write. These are the frameworks in which we work and our overall internal SOPs to make sure that we're consistent. Something I actually learned during a high school job of mine, great job, was a lifeguard at a water park here in Colorado called Water World, and went through a program that they call Top Gun to be kind of the best of the best guards. And there's this big wave pool, and you got to make sure that you have all these different kind of standards. And as I actually became a manager, because I worked there season over season, rose up the ranks, became a manager, the first day of the managerial training, which I still hold to me every single day and will forever in the future, is the first in a human being's life. We'll back up a little bit. You actually become the person that you're going to be basically the rest of your life, more or less, within the first 3 years, which is very strange, but there's a lot of research behind it. So if you just collapse the timeline for that water park job, which was a summer job, they said you have 1 week to set expectations for your lifeguards. And these are thousands, tens of thousands of people's lives on the line. If your lifeguard is just there to get a suntan and not actually protect human being life. So I bring that mindset where if you don't have a disciplined first exposure, first introduction, first impression, you will not have that retained as a high bar the rest of the time that that employee is at that firm. So if we have a really good, thorough onboarding, we usually are seeing that kept consistent, that standard kept high for the duration of their tenure at BPC, if not getting even higher. And we've had tremendous feedback from majority, if not all of our recent employees, especially with the quality of the onboarding that they've never received at any other organization in the past. So I think that is definitely fundamental in making sure that we stay consistent within our firm and the services that we are delivering on behalf of our customers. I do want to come back to what Eric was talking about with documentation being as close to the code as possible. A recommendation I would have for all NetSuite consultants, both technical and functional, is to try and bring those solution documents that I mentioned, that we write, solution design documents, and incorporating them actually within NetSuite. How do we do that? We actually use custom tabs, custom categories, center categories, and center links. And whether that document be stored in a G drive, in a SharePoint, maybe you actually put it directly into the NetSuite file cabinet, which I love. Wherever that resides, having a nice navigational path to be able to reference it and training your customer on how to access it is extremely imperative. Hopefully, the customer's resource team is not turning over much, but even if they are, if you got this tab, especially if it's called, hey, this is the Bryant Park Consulting tab, here's links to all of our solution design documents, here's links to all of our specific suite scripts that we wrote, it adds this extra functional reference that I rarely see used and is an extremely powerful tool. Just being able to use that custom center tab, center category, center links. So that's a little recommendation I would have. You might be able to keep it in the classic center for your admins only, if you don't want to messy or dirty up some of those other user roles, but it has become something that also allows us to transition team members much more easily and empowers, enables our client, which is usually your center point of reference in majority of the engagements, whether that was the old developer or the new.
It's a good tip.
Yeah, that's great.
So Eric, I know we're getting down to the last few minutes. Cassius, are you good to go a little bit longer, or are you have a hard stop?
Did give myself a half-hour buffer after here. It was more to just chat with the two of you, but I'm happy to share more and more wisdom with anyone else that also has time to go a little bit longer.
Well, I know there's a bunch of questions. Should we go through those first, Eric? Like, how do you want to do it?
Yeah, I think I'll do a quick message from Salto here, and then I think, yeah, let's get into a couple of these questions. So this episode, thank you all for joining us, is hosted and sponsored by Salto. They are not a consulting company looking to sell you services. They have built a powerful DevOps platform for NetSuite and many other platforms like Salesforce for developers and admins to manage, track, deploy, compare, promote changes to your NetSuite accounts. So if you'd like to learn more about Salto and their DevOps platform, check out salto.io. You can get a free trial and a free live demo. Okay. Yeah, let's check out
shout out for me, by the way, on Salto's functionality. It really has brought our functional resources much closer to our technical resources. We're able to do a lot of code deployment without having to leverage some of our developers. So it's a great developer tool. It is a phenomenal functional tool as well. And the things that they're doing is phenomenal. We do use that inside of our standard operating procedures at Bryant Park.
Nice. I was not aware that y'all use Salto. That's great.
It actually
Just getting
answers one of
started
the
with it,
questions
coming off
too.
of Sweet World. Happened to have a
Very
booth
nice.
right next door to them as well, which was nice.
Oh, awesome.
That's awesome.
All right.
Yeah, so that was one of the questions,
Oh,
was
yeah,
whether
go
or
ahead.
not Bryant Park uses Salto, so we can check that one off the list.
Got it. This question's from Vaughn. Do you use or can you suggest any specific tools to document or create an internal knowledge base of a NetSuite account?
One of the simplest tools is the one that I just mentioned, those custom center tabs, center categories, center links. That one, not necessarily like an AI type tool, right? But something that I think is very powerful. In terms of overall documentation, we use Lucidchart heavily. I think being able to show a process diagram that orchestrates what a solution is expected to do is extremely powerful. So we use Lucid. You could use Visio, a variety of other tools. In terms, wanting to make sure I answer his question appropriately. Looks like that one might have just jumped over to answered. Document internal knowledge base. We have evaluated a few Slack plugins to correlate different questions. It is still a work in progress. I think a lot of those tools add some value and others not, but we are constantly trying to figure out how to capture knowledge. We have a very active internal series of Slack channels. We have a knowledge kind of master channel that has a bunch of sub channels within it, whether that be dev, whether it be integrations, etc. So we do want to make sure that the resources that really need to know it and be updated aren't being overwhelmed with the content. And then we do our enablement in a monthly kind of deployment fashion. So inside of our Google Drive, we use the Google G Suite. We do have very thorough organization to just make sure that we're staying up to date. And then we also have that built in with our NetSuite environment. We have it called a wiki. So we use NetSuite internally, by the way, but we actually reference our wiki documents to remind us to update our knowledge materials on a 6-month cadence. And that just keeps things really fresh, organized, and allows for continuous onboarding and that they're learning the things that we want them to learn. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, Vaughn, but hopefully it did.
Yeah, I think there's so many options for making documents, different types of documents, storing documents. Like there's so many that it's hard and maybe not super useful to give specific tool recommendations, but practice recommendations like having reminders to update your documentation and keeping the documentation in NetSuite or very close to NetSuite, right? Linked from NetSuite. We're talking about transitioning projects. It's great if you keep all your design docs in your company's Google Drive and everybody knows where it is and everybody sees it. When we're talking about transitioning projects, is if that client goes somewhere else, goes to a new partner, hires their own team to do their work, they don't have any of that stuff now because you've kept it isolated in a silo in your own space. So having practices like that where the documentation is as close to the customization as you can get is extremely important. Having just said tools maybe aren't that useful, the ones I've used in the past, Confluence is great. I use JSDoc to document my code. And I just write readmes in Markdown in the different SuiteScript folders in my project. Those go up in my repo. GitHub renders them nicely, and then those get deployed to NetSuite as well. So the readmes stay right there with the code. wherever they're relevant. I don't do that in every single file or folder necessarily, but the ones that are more complicated or maybe more, especially things that are more commonly reused, central utilities and things like that, that documentation goes right along with the code.
I was going to say that's the same thing I do. I try to, if it's a complicated project, I use README files that sit right alongside the scripts in the file cabinet. And that way, you know where they are. Like you said, if somebody else comes along and, again, whole topic of this episode, inherits your project, they have all the documentation there as well. So, yeah. But sadly, I don't see that happen very often in my clients. Like I go to the file cabinet, I can't even tell by looking at the name of the script, like, what is this? So, and actually, I want to say, Cassius, one of the very first tips that you ever gave me was the prefix on the IDs of things in NetSuite. And, I would love to tell you that I see a lot of people do that. They don't, but I do. And I thank you for that. It was, I think, tip number one that I had from you on day number one is, and, yeah, you either know what I'm talking about or you don't, but yeah, it's a good one. So, all right. Well,
Let's see. Roy wants to know if you know about 1010 scanning in lifeguarding.
Saw this question. Yes. So you got your left-hand window here, got kind of your 180-degree water that you got to watch. You go down kind of 10, you got your T-bump. So Roy, if you are a lifeguard, you got to make sure you get your T-bump. You go 10 seconds down kind of the other path, and then you got a 10-second quick scan. So I actually have a 10-10-10. I don't know if that's similar to your experience, Ray, of 10-10 scanning, but yeah, we had a full 30-second scan down, T-bump up, and then scan your water 10 seconds. And you repeat that all day long, but keeps people safe.
So Cassius, you were
Especially
not
up
out there.
in
You were not out there just to get a suntan, obviously. You were doing the
was
job.
an extra benefit to the job. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's awesome. All right.
Anything else we want to touch on? I think that's all the.
There's
I didn't scroll down far enough.
Yeah, they just came in.
Let's see. This is from David. When working with a client, especially clients that are very busy, how do you help ensure that those projects maintain strong momentum and ensure that you don't miss any key details as part of the engagement?
Great question. I think a key to successful NetSuite projects is an engaged customer. I'll say that and I'll repeat it over and over and over again, that I could go build you the most beautiful NetSuite environment, but if you don't have a dedicated and engaged customer that also engages their team members that learn this new process of NetSuite, this new environment of NetSuite, you actually, the metaphor I use is, I'll build you the Ferrari, but if you don't know how to drive stick, it's just going to sit there and it's going to look pretty. And I'm going to think I've done a good job, but you're not actually going to get the use out of it. So I would first challenge our customers, which is actually what we do in our sales cycle, to identify who your project team is going to be. And we're going to match your project team. But if you aren't able to get a customer to bring the project team, then this is not important enough to them. I mean, that's the reality of the situation, especially in NetSuite or any ERP. That's the lifeblood of your system or of your company. Not the system, but the company. Like you are running your business on NetSuite. It is at the core. So if you don't have resources that you're willing to bring in and ensure that the system is going to support the business and the growth and the future planning that you want to accomplish, then you're not ready to take on a legitimate NetSuite project. Now, in a post-go live world, there's definitely going to be a lot of moving parts. And Bryant Park is a startup company. I look at ourselves and forever will look at ourselves as a startup company, and we wear a lot of hats, but you have to make sure that you are organized, that you're working with a program coordinator, whether that be with your partner. We offer program services. We actually just introduced what we call organizational change management services. So that's not necessarily NetSuite consulting. It is business consulting to prepare what change is going to occur, how to be ready for it, how to plan for it. And that can oftentimes be a predecessor to the actual NetSuite project. So those would be my recommendations to challenge your customers softly, eloquently, but let it be known that their success is on the shoulders of themselves, just as it is on mine.
It's interesting that you bring that up. Like in my my contract or agreement, when you send it to a client, I have the expectations that they can have of me, but then I also have a section of the expectations I have of them. And part of that is having someone be available, and not like 2 weeks from now, we're going to regroup and talk about, like, quickly, like sometimes there's important decisions need to be made quickly. So yeah, I think having that engagement and making it known to the client up front that, like you said, the success of the project is as much about the work we do as it is about them contributing and telling us here's what they need. And it's really, I think if you think about the conversation that we've had here today, it all comes down to really good communication, right? Whether it's written, oral, whatever, it's like that's what makes all NetSuite work successful. If that breaks down, doesn't matter whether you're inheriting a project, whether it's a greenfield project, if your project's doomed if the communication isn't there. So do we have any more questions, or are we?
I don't think so. Roy wants to learn more about the onboarding process. We can have you back to talk about that.
Or you can just apply, maybe
Apply at BryantParkConsulting.com. Plug there.
Right.
We're hiring.
Experience it
My
firsthand.
LinkedIn, it's got the hiring little icon on it. Yeah, we're always looking for talent. So
Awesome.
would love to welcome any new, talented, driven, skilled individuals to the team.
Yeah. That was going to be one of my next questions. Where should people go to find out more about you, more about Bryant Park?
It's all about the team, right? It's not about Cassius, it's about Bryant Park Consulting. So we got a phenomenal staff. We got 2 and about to be 3 really talented talent department individuals. Matt Fasol is a name maybe to write down. Find him on LinkedIn. He's on it all day, every day, but he'll become your best friend overnight in a 5-minute conversation. So really great individual. And then we got Amber, who is the biggest sweetheart in the world. So phenomenal talent team that you can reach out to. Once again, Matt Fasul, Fasul, or you can visit BryantParkConsulting.com. A lot of information on the website.
Cassius, I just want to thank you for coming on here today, and congratulations on the success of Bryant Park Consulting. It is amazing. Like, I remember when I first saw that you were going there, and it was like, well, that's interesting, and it's not what I expected. And then all of a sudden it's like, this person's there and this person's at Bryant Park. You're doing something right, and you deserve the success. It is well deserved. So congratulations. I really hope we can have you back on in the future. So, thanks.
I'd love to be back, and thank you for kind words. We'll continue to get better, do better, and just keep everyone's head up, right? So I appreciate the services that the 2 of you are offering. I think both of you are fundamental in the NetSuite community, and there are a plethora of individuals that have the utmost respect for the 2 of you. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to be invited and participate in the panel with the 2 of you.
Yeah, it's been great to have you.
Yeah.
All right.
So take us out.
Yeah, it sounds like we're bringing this episode to a close. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. Thank you, especially Cassius, for joining us. It's a great conversation, and we hope to have you back. This was recorded. It will be available on Salto Leap in a few days and on the Salto YouTube channel. And if Tim ever edits it, it will be up on this SuiteScript Stories podcast feed. If you'd like to get in touch with us about the show, maybe you have a question or just want to talk, you can email me, eric@stoic.software, and you can check out Tim's website, timdietrich.me. If you'd like to learn more about Salto and their DevOps platform for NetSuite and others, check out salto.io for a free trial and a free demo. And And we hope you all join us next time as we continue to explore, highlight interesting people and stories from the SuiteScript community. And we'll see you then.